views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
Hello, this is Patty Hunter of Patty's Page. Welcome to my show. We are in a beautiful home here with Bob Wearley. Hello, Bob. Hello.
Hi, Patty.
And this is my co-host, Terry Doran.
Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome.
Hi, Bob.
So we are here to to talk with Robert F. Wearley and about him, his history as he grew up, and all the adventures he's been on, and what you're doing now. How about them apples? So, whereabouts are you from? Are you originally from Fort Wayne?
I was born and raised in Woodburn. In fact, Doc Mosier walked across the street to deliver me, February 25th, 1933.
Oh,
Wow.
wowzers. That's a long way. Where is it?
Woodburn is 20 miles east, about 2 miles from the Ohio state line.
Oh,
Yeah. I was there for the river trip last year.
Oh, that's where it
Places we
was.
camped.
We
Yeah.
over there.
Came and was just there for a dance rehearsal. It was Sunday.
So, how long were you living there as you were growing up?
Till age 19 when I left to go in the U.S. Air Force,
You went into the Air Force?
April '52.
My dad. That's when I was born about a month later. I was born about a month later. My dad was in the Royal Canadian Air
Oh.
Force
Let's see.
as a navigator.
Navigator,
What were you?
pilot.
Pilot. How long were you in the
Well, I
Air
had
Force?
17 active years, and then a general and a colonel suggested I get out of the Air Force and go to work for Howard Hughes as their chief pilot. So the general got me a job at Nellis Air Force Base in the reserves. So after I got my 20-year commitment in the reserves and promoted to lieutenant colonel, well, I was age 60 when I could start drawing retired pay by benefits. But I worked as chief pilot for Howard Hughes personal fleet aircraft for 9 years.
Oh, what was
But
he
when
like?
did that start, Bob?
That started in early 1969.
So about 17 years after you joined, became a pilot in the Air Force.
Right.
So, when you were piloting Mr. Hughes, where did you go?
Well, we have to clarify one thing. I never piloted him and I never saw him.
Oh,
And that is not unusual.
That's
That's the
good
first thing people assume.
sorry.
But very few people saw him, and in 1969 he was a total recluse. And when he flew, a lot of times he didn't even use his own airplane, or very seldom. In fact, I don't know of any time he used his own airplane. The ultra-rich kind of take care of each other on those kind of things, and then major corporations flew him. And one time they contracted Northrop Aviation to fly him with their corporate plane, and that's part of the appendix in my book. A good friend of mine, Don Short, who happened to be President Johnson's pilot, became director of aviation for Northrop Aviation. So the Hughes people contacted their aviation department to charter their airplane to fly him from Nicaragua to Vancouver, British Columbia.
Oh.
And I've had Don narrate that and what it's like to fly Howard Hughes, and because I knew people would want to know that.
Right.
So Don wrote up a real nice narrative of that and his credentials, because Don has some very good credentials, and I put that in the appendix so people could see kind of what I call the foolishness and silliness that went along with keeping him totally without the press getting a picture of him, etc.
I wonder why he was.
Well, if you're asking why he was like that, that's a few psychiatrists and psychologists
I'm sure they would have
were
filthy.
analyzing the same thing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of books out there. In fact, I got on Amazon, I counted well over 100 books, etc. And mine is listed there, but because Howard Hughes' name isn't in the title, it doesn't pop right up there. That's why I'm considering doing a second edition, changing the title. Like one publisher said, I need to put Howard Hughes' name in the title.
Yeah.
The Prodigal Pilot, and it does say that I was an Air Force veteran and chief pilot for Howard Hughes' personal fleet of aircraft. But what might lend a lot of credibility to that suggestion is that there's a new Howard Hughes movie coming out that Warren Beatty is starring in.
Oh,
And,
yes, I heard about that.
and that is yet to be titled. So I might wait to see what that title is before.
You do have the end of the Hughes Empire.
Right.
And Spruce Goose has the name of
Yeah.
their plane.
Well, the Spruce Goose was a nickname that they gave that wooden flying boat that he built in the late, well, he built it during the war. It was built out of wood because
Yeah.
Henry Kaiser, who was a ship magnate that was making the Liberty ships to haul supplies over to England, the German U-boats were picking those off like sitting ducks, and he went to Howard Hughes and said, we need to build an airplane so we can fly this stuff over, and Kaiser promised Hughes he could get the aluminum and the engines, but he couldn't get the aluminum, so Howard Hughes made it out of wood, and a new wood process, and finally he got the 8 engines necessary, and then Senator Brewster, after the war, had aspirations of becoming a vice presidential candidate and copying Harry Truman's way to become the vice president candidate. Truman found a lot of waste in the government during the war, and it came to light, and that's why Roosevelt put him on the ticket. So Brewster was going to do the same thing with Howard Hughes, except Howard Hughes did his homework and kind of made a monkey out of Brewster, and defied the Senate investigating committee and bringing certain people there. But he said in front of the mic, and that's in the movie, The Aviators, and that's actual words,
Right.
that he would leave the country if it didn't fly. And
And?
so he flew in about a mile in 1947
Oh.
just to prove a point, and then
You
put it into dry dock, and it stayed there until he died, and we gave it to the Southern California Museum, and they put it on display next to the Queen Elizabeth,
Oh, wow.
and left it there. Now that Spruce Goose, as they call it, is up in McMimney, Oregon, in a museum, aviation museum now.
My goodness.
Who'd you fly then when you were Mr. Hughes' chief pilot?
Well, we flew his executives. Bob Mayhew, who was running the Hughes Empire at that time out of Vegas, and Bill Gay, who was executive vice president, and some others. But we flew a lot of celebrities for various reasons, because in the Hughes, he had 5 hotels, and he had a lot of the showrooms with the stars, and if the stars had a commitment someplace, they would let them use the airplane and, to make that commitment, so that, as they said, the showroom wouldn't be dark, because when they had the show going on, they had people walking by the slot machines and so on. So they wanted to keep people coming into the hotel. So we flew Bob Hope and
Oh, wow.
Dinah Shore.
Oh, I love her. I miss him.
Let's see, Wayne Newton a lot, and Dean Martin. So a lot of when my grandchildren say, "Grandpa, tell us some of the movie stars," of course, when I rattle off those names, they don't have any idea what I'm talking about, which is kind of interesting. But and then Joe DiMaggio was one of my favorites, because the organization came up with the idea of the Hughes Sport Network, which was the forerunner of ESPN.
Oh.
So they hired Joe DiMaggio to be the president, which was a nice move. So I picked Joe up in San Francisco, where he lived one time, and flew him into Van Nuys to pick someone else up, and then back to Las Vegas. And I got to know him, first name basis, which was neat.
Yeah.
He'd be walking around the terminal, around one of the casinos or something, and I'd spot him, and I'd have someone with him, and I said, "Would you like to meet Joe Louis?" I mean, not Joe Louis, that's another story. "Would you like to meet Joe DiMaggio?" And "You know Joe?" And I said, "Sure." I walk up, Joe, and say, "Hi, Bob, how you doing?" They just, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And but he was a very nice guy. I really enjoyed flying him.
So you were with Hughes for 9 years?
9 years.
So what years did you start and when did you end?
1969 to 78.
Were you out of Las Vegas? Is that where you?
Well, yeah, we lived in Las Vegas, but I was able, when Hughes moved to the Bahamas, I was able to get my flight department to move to the Bahamas.
Oh, nice.
And there was a small hangar behind the Air Bahamas hangar, and we were able to take that over and live over there for a year. And then he moved out in the middle of the night, you know, on a yacht, which I nicknamed the African Queen, because his yacht was in dry dock and I was in New York. We couldn't fly him out. I was in New York on training for an airplane. He had about 5 of them, and we didn't have anybody qualified. And they said, "Well, we obviously can't depreciate these. We don't have somebody qualified to fly them." So I took some crew members and we went up there anyway, then we assembled back in Las Vegas. And then after he died, why, we started selling off his toys because he collected airplanes, a lot of airplanes. He had more airplanes than I had crew members to fly. I'd borrow Air Force pilots to be able to fly them. So I had a chance to go to work for Howard Hughes, for Singapore Airlines. And so I decided it'd be fun to be an airline captain, and so particularly on 747, so I left and didn't.
So you became a commercial pilot after Howard Hughes experience?
Yes, went over to Singapore, and actually went over to Singapore to fly 707s, which I was rated in, but I knew they were getting, Singapore, and at that time had placed the largest civilian billion-dollar order with Boeing. Boeing had many billion-dollar orders with military, but they never had a civilian order. And they bought 10 200 series 747s at $100 million apiece.
Oh, they're beautiful.
And they needed a lot of crew members to fly those, obviously. So those of us that had heavy experience, like I did in the military, were upgraded right away.
So you lived all over? Las Vegas, Bahamas?
Bermuda
Bermuda,
in the Air Force, and then Nassau with Hughes, and Singapore, and then I back to Las Vegas and Oklahoma City, various places, you know.
This book is called The Prodigal Pilot. Okay, in your words, what does that mean?
Well, I've been told that the book, the title doesn't fit what's in the book, because one person that read it said they were looking for the frivolous spending, which wasn't my nature. I was looking at the biblical prodigal son who squandered his life.
Yes.
And came home and his father forgave him.
Yes.
And that's essentially what happened with me. As I point out in the narrative with Amazon and so on, it says that I lost my moral compass, which I did. And God, as I say in my book, God gave my first wife a terminal illness, which it took to bring us back home. And when I met you and we were playing tennis, it hadn't taken effect yet, but eventually she couldn't play tennis. She started playing golf, and then eventually she couldn't do that. But I realized I needed to support a family and friends with the terminal illness she had. So, and I always wanted to come back home anyway, and so I gave up flying and started a business and struggled.
What are you doing? What were you doing in the business that you started?
Commercial filter service, changing heating and air conditioning filters and businesses as a service business.
How long were you with that?
Well, I started in '86, so it's pushing 29 years. And my stepson is the CEO, and he's doing very well. And I have very little to do with the company anymore, and which allows me now to be a volunteer chaplain in the jail and pursue other interests.
So tell me about being a chaplain. What did you have to do to become one?
Well, first of all, you got to get clearance, and then
Ordained or something?
no,
No?
we're called volunteer chaplains because I help out with substance abuse classes. There's 30 chaps that take the substance abuse class, and that helps them get a time cut if they complete it, the various phases. And the lady that teaches it, she needs a man in there with them, so I'm able to interact with those. And then we take a book card into the cell blocks, and we're able to one-on-one and talk to the guys as long as they'll let us in there. But we pass out books of various interest, you know, to the
Inspiration?
a lot of them are inspirational books, some westerns, that type of thing, novels, but we kind of limit them to some degree.
Your book? They read your book?
Oh, yeah, it's all over the jail. I made sure of that. You know, they knew I was writing the book, so it's in all the cell blocks, and they're standing in line to read it. But that's fun, you know, because it was interesting. The other Sunday I was in one of the cell blocks, and the guy was reading it, so he didn't know who I was, and I walked up and I started asking. I said, "What are you reading there?" I asked him all kind of questions, and he was answering, you know, just going on and on. Finally, I took the book and I turned it around, and I held it up, and I said, "That guy on the back look familiar?" And he looked at me, he jumped up, shook my hand.
Yeah,
Wow,
wow.
I'm meeting an author.
That is really a cool story.
So tell me, how long have you been a chaplain?
About 7 years.
7 years? You like it?
Oh yeah, I thoroughly enjoy it. It's very gratifying. As I've told a lot of people, I feel more blessed walking out of there than I do when I walk out of church.
Do you ever try to help them change?
Oh yes, by all means. That's what we do. I pass out my card to them and say, if you want me to mentor you, give me a call when you get out. Or some guys, when they go off to prison, they call me and or write to me, and they want some various books. So I go to the bookstore and send them to them, because I can't send them direct, but the bookstores can. And sometimes they call me, sometimes they don't. And I tell them, you know, it's not about money, but I will buy you lunch or maybe some gas for your car or take you to get a job. But mainly we try to help them find a job. But we have formed Faith-Based Mentoring Ministry, which has been in business, well, just about 7 years now.
Oh, yeah.
And we meet on Monday nights with anywhere from 15 to 25.
What's
Yeah.
the average age
In
in prison?
well, in the prison,
Teenagers?
it's 20s to 50s maybe, but more in the 20s and 30s.
A waste of life.
Is this the county jail downtown?
Yes.
Is that where-
Why do they end up there? I mean, besides they did something wrong, but do you try to find out how you can reach them and how what had happened to them? They may have been abused when they were kids.
No, we don't go in that deep.
No.
A lot of times I don't even ask what their offense is unless they want to tell me. I don't really care. But the reason we form faith-based mentoring is the recidivism rate is like 70%, give or take. They get out and they get back into the environment that got them there. Byron Johnson, the professor, Dr. Byron Johnson at Baylor University, wrote a book, More God, Less Crime. And a couple of years ago I brought him here, and we went out to Sweetwater Sound, and he had book signing and talked about his book. He has about 30 years of measurable data on ex-offenders and how to reduce recidivism. And there's been several places, the Boston Miracle is one, and the Philadelphia another one, where the clergy, the law enforcement, and judicial system teamed up together in Boston and started working together and reduced recidivism significantly. Then in Philadelphia, they started working with Big Brothers and Big Sisters on those children that had parents that were incarcerated. And they started concentrating on them, and that helped reduce recidivism. But Byron, he said that when the chaps get out, many times they find Jesus in jail, so to speak, and they get back into their environment and they are back in jail again, even though they have every intentions of staying out. And he says it may take 2 or 3 times before they get it. And then when they do get back in, they become evangelists. And I've seen that happen many times. They start Bible studies and they become the mentors inside the jail.
How many, what's the percentage have been using illegal substance?
Oh, it's really hard to say. The majority, some connection, either dealing or using. Some are in for other reasons, habitual traffic offenders or violence or child support or some things. It's hard to know.
And we've tracked the organization Patty and I are with that I talked to you about. I just met a lady from Big Brothers Big Sisters, and we got like 500 kids on a waiting list, mostly males. So maybe I said maybe we can get some people there to talk to these kids, and like you just went and talked to them and told them like what you do at the jail. I'm not sure, but probably some of their parents certainly. When you mentioned.
Well, I've had lunch buddies at Washington School for about 7 years, and it's a good program. Unfortunately, one chap I was with from the 4th grade and the 5th grade, third, fourth, and the 5th grade I lost him because he got in trouble, and they sent him to a disciplinary school. Well, I couldn't go to that disciplinary school. That's when he needed me.
Yeah.
He was under pressure to join a gang and so on, and I wanted to try to help him. I mean, that kind really needs the help, but most of the time they don't have a male role model in their family, and that's what really hurts. It's a generational thing. If we don't get down to the root cause of the problems, we aren't going to solve it. We're putting Band-Aids on the jail.
Yeah.
But yes, we need that chaplaincy in the jail. There's no question about it.
Oh,
and we're taking a load off of the correctional officers and so on, by helping. But if we don't get to the children, and getting the fathers to pick up their responsibilities.
Dysfunctional families nowadays,
right.
Single families.
That's what it's so prevalent today as it was 50, 75 years ago.
Yeah, much more.
It's sad, isn't it? You kind of feel for them.
What about Watergate? That's on the
Oh,
title.
yeah,
Watergate.
Title.
Well, that's really interesting. I was called before the Watergate Committee, 10 of us in the Hughes organization, to testify. And the reason being, the Hughes organization loaned Nixon's brother Donald a couple $100,000. Now Nixon's brother Donald had aspirations of starting a Nixon burger chain in Southern California, among other things. And Howard Hughes liked to cover both sides of the street, meaning the Republicans and the Democrats.
Yeah.
So they had hired Larry O'Brien, who was chairman of the Democratic Party, and put him on a consulting status at the Sands Hotel. And across the street at the Frontier Hotel was Dick Danner, who was former city manager at Miami, and he introduced B.B. Rebozo to President Nixon. So there we had the Republican side. Well, when Nixon ran for president against Kennedy, the Democrats found out about that Hughes loan, and they spread it all over California, and that was Nixon's home state.
Yeah.
And he lost California. Then he doubled back 2 years later and ran for governor, and they did the same thing, and he lost that race. Well, B.B. Rebozo said that he blamed the Hughes loan for those 2 losses, and he would have won both of those elections if he would have won California. So Nixon was obsessed with finding out what Larry O'Brien was doing so he could embarrass the Democrats, meaning malice. So I point out Nixon's sin of malice caused Watergate. If he'd have let it go, it would have never happened. But I'm using as my authority H.R. Haldeman's book, Ends of Power, which he unequivocally states in there that Nixon said, we're not going to let the Democrats get away with this. Find out what Larry O'Brien is doing for Howard Hughes. So probably that absence of the tapes was when he told Chuck Colson or whoever to bug Watergate, because there was no nothing to tie, that Nixon actually said, go to Watergate and bug his office.
Oh my gosh, so indirectly. with
Indirectly,
your
Hughes was
connection with
responsible.
Howard Hughes.
Right.
It's
You
amazing.
played a role, and a major role in
Well,
American history.
Well,
in that sense.
not a major role.
Well,
I was,
Hughes,
I was the bag man. I flew the airplane with
Well,
the
what I
bag
meant
man.
was the whole association with Howard
You
Hughes.
were a link.
Okay.
That Howard Hughes loaning that
Right.
money, Nixon gets obsessed.
And of course, when I was for the Watergate Committee, they were querying me to find out, track down the money that Howard Hughes gave $100,000 to Nixon's campaign. And of course, Dick Danner probably delivered it, and I was the one that flew Dick to Miami. And we
Oh,
used to
my
fly
God.
down to Miami and pick B.B. Rebozo up, and he'd jump in the jump seat and talk flying while we take him to Washington. And he'd get off the airplane, get a taxi, and have dinner with the president that night.
So how long have you been living in Fort Wayne now?
I came back in '84, bought a home, and flew from '84 to '85 for Royal Jordanian Airlines, and living in Amman, Jordan, in the Marriott Hotel. Tried to commute back to Fort Wayne. I had a home out in Kiki Shores. And then after 1 year there with them, they sold one of their 747s and offered me a 707 in the Middle East. So I decided that the Middle East was heating up, and
Yeah, it's too much.
so I gave it up. And then Jim Kelly offered me a job flying for him, and I joked that Jim and I had a different opinion how his company ought to be run. So I left, and I always wanted to start my own business. So I started my own business in '86, and struggled, sold everything I owned at age 53 to get the company up and running, and with a terminally ill wife, and eventually
Oh my God.
after she died, I remarried, and that changed everything because I had a chance to become the first marketing director of the Fort Wayne International Airport. So I put my new wife Sharon in charge of commercial filter, and we were able to plow all the money back in to get it back financially sound. And I had been on the airport board. Mayor Paul Helmke put me on the airport board, and I was instrumental in helping create that position, but with no intentions of taking that position. And when we didn't budget for a headhunter, why they asked me if I was interested, so I resigned from the board and took the job.
Well, you know, this is towards the end of the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
My pleasure.
Oh, is it Robert or Bob?
It's always Bob.
This is Terry Doran.
And we didn't even hit the highlight of your life, which was playing tennis with me.
That's how I found. That's how we met. I get a kick out of calling it. We belong to the 5-0, and everybody said, "Wow, you're a 5-0." I said, "Yeah." Everybody was over 50.
This is Patty Hunter, and thank you for tuning in. This was a very enlightening half hour, and thank you. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Fabulous.
Godspeed, my love, until we meet again. You're always in my heart and every dream. Don't let this time apart give in to all our fears. God will keep us close from up above. So until we meet again, Godspeed, my love.